If you want to learn how to connect a Maui app to a web API service, then stick around. So now that we have an API service, we can create a thick client front end using Maui. So I will add a new project and I'll make a Maui app here. And I will just call this Gob Client. And I'm going to pick framework .NET 7. Right, now that we have two projects in the same solution, we kind of have to decide which one we're going to run when we hit the play button. So eventually we want to run both of them at the same time, and there's a couple different ways we can do that. We can actually launch two Visual Studios opening the same solution. We can launch both at the same time. There's lots of different ways, but for now I'm just going to launch this client, the Gob client. So I'll just change it up here in the selector and I'll run this demo program. And we can see it makes the demo program for us. And just to make things simpler, right now I don't plan on targeting iOS or Android. So to minimize on some of the build time and warnings and occasional things that would happen, I'm going to just disable those targets. All I did is opened up the properties on my client project and I'm just simply unclicking those. Okay, so now that we have both of these projects running, I can start one at a time basically by right clicking over here and just clicking to debug it, right? So here's the client, right? And here's the web API project, so I can do the same thing and run it like that, okay? Or I can just set one of these as the start project. So right now the default is this Gob client, right? But if I want my default start project to be the web API project, I would just right click it and do set as startup project. So when I click the play button, that one goes. So you can either run both of them at the same time. If you want to do that, it's probably a good idea to run two Visual Studios at the same time. If you want to do debugging, you can debug them both at the same time in two different Visual Studios. You just open up the same solution. Okay. What I'm going to do here, just because it's easier to show on my screen, I'm going to just edit a configuration. So over here under one of the starts, like you want to click this like right down arrow button, and it doesn't matter which of these is set up to be your startup project. That button will still appear. It's this right side. You can do configure startup projects, and again you can just pick one or the other here, which one you want to be the startup, or you can say run both of them. Okay, just choose one of these to run as, let me do this. So you can only click one of them to be debugging, right? So we can see this one's here running okay, and this one's here running okay. And now we want this client to talk to this server. Okay, so the way I have it right now, let me choose not to debug and look at the debug messages of the web API project. I want to see the client debugging, right? And that means I can set breakpoints in the debug code of the client. So the first thing I want to do is just establish basic connectivity from this client to this server. And we can see where the server is living at. Right now it's localhost 7093. Okay, so we don't want to hard code that in every service call. Obviously we want to just put that somewhere one time so that we could easily change it when this gets deployed. So there's a couple approaches you can take. I mean, since both of these projects are using .NET, one approach is to share these models right here. So we could definitely make this code reusable if we wanted to. So this is a strongly typed model that was created. So sometimes people do that, all right, and sometimes they just kind of duplicate the model down there. Okay, either way is works fine. So in the client app, I'm going to make a button that's going to go fetch the data. So I just stub out a little button like this, and I'll make a new event handler. And my event handler is automatically made for me right here in the page. I do need to have a model just kind of like the same way here, so I can, either copy and paste, or we could just reuse these and refer to this, or we can make another project that is just shared models. But for now, I'm just gonna copy and paste this. And what I'm going to do is add a folder called models. Make sure your project is not running, because it'll lock it up and not let you add them or rename them. So I'm going to just right click and do add new folder. I'll call it models. And in here, I'll add a file called people. So new item, it doesn't matter. You can just do class is fine. So let me call this person instead, just like we did in the other one. Okay, so we can almost copy and paste this. It's, just watch the namespace would not make sense, and a partial class would not be needed. A partial class is just a class divided among files. So this is all in one file. Okay, so right here we can just paste those in, or again, we should have a nicer way to share those models if we wanted to. Okay, so now that I have this, I can make a call to my web API and try to consume a get. So inside my button handler, I'm going to add some code. Now, again, we would probably want to separate this out into some functionality by itself, because we should not really have network access code and data access code right in our UI, but I'm just trying to demonstrate how to make the calls here. Okay, so first of all, we have an async call right here. So this is awaited, and since this is awaited and this is async, we need to make the whole function async, right? So one single async function pretty much pollutes the whole function at the top, so we have to go ahead and make this async. Okay, and then we would also need to add our JSON library, and I don't think it's added in to this project. I did add it to the Web API project, but they're separate, and we can see in the dependencies I don't have Newtonsoft in there, and I do have it in the web project right there. So I'm going to go ahead and click my client project and add Newtonsoft. And as usual, it's always the first one that shows. And so I will click that, and I will make sure it goes into the GOB client. And I will click install, and then we'll see it get added into the dependencies. Okay, so under here, if we expand the .NET 7 thing there, we see Newtonsoft added in right there. Okay, so in our client page, we need to go ahead and add Newtonsoft into here. And we should add Newtonsoft.json like that. Okay, so that'll help this. Let me fix this error. I think we're good here. Okay, so I'm missing one little curly brace there. It should be fixed. Now this is code that is just going to console write line this, and we don't really have a console on a Maui project, so I'm going to use debug.writeline, right? And to use debug.writeline, I need to use system diagnostics right there. And now I can debug writeline for these. And I just have some code here, so all we do is connect to this server, which I'll run locally, make a client request, okay, run that request, get a response, so I get JSON string back, then I convert that to a list of person, okay, and it will convert that for me, and then I loop through and display each person to the debug console. Okay, so it is running both of these, so make sure this starts up and you see this page. And I'll put a breakpoint here and we'll see what happens. And let's see. Okay, so I cleaned up this file a little bit and I at least put the code in a single function. Again, this should probably go in a completely different file that is only concerned with getting data. But what I did, I just made an asynchronous task because we do have asynchronous methods in here. So I call it get people async, just so people calling it knows it's asynchronous. And of course, I need to mark it as async in the front. Okay, and what causes me to mark this whole function as asynchronous is an async method here that needs awaited and an async method here that needs awaited. So it just gets the data from my service and then returns a list of people. It's not really robust. It doesn't handle errors too well yet. And let's look at the next thing I did. I made a list view inside of this file here, this main page XAML file that is going to act as like a grid. Okay, there's lots of views that display lists of things inside Maui. Several of these are shown here, right, in the documentation on displaying collections. There's just different types of these for different applications. Carousel view is just something that kind of spins around. Then we have a variety of other ones like collection view, list view, and we have table view as well. And they're pretty similar, so you'd want to see which one is going to be best for your specific application. All right, so this is a function that gets the data. This is kind of a little outline. I did spend a little bit of time on this, making it so it shows little grid boxes and things. There's probably other ways to do it. And this UI element right here is called people list view. So I just used a list view. And whenever I click this button, right, well, I'm going to call this function, right? So this has async methods in it. So it makes this whole function async, right? And I'm calling it in this one. So this whole function now becomes async, right? And my new function that I wrote, I need to await it. And then all I do is simply say connect people to this people list view that I just showed you over here. So it just binds it together and it looks for these little tags on where to fill in the data at. Okay, and I put it on the main thread since it's a UI element. And so I run both of these at the same time. So they both run right here. I cleaned up some of the junk on this page too and got rid of some of the demo code. When I click data, it will go ahead and get my data here. And for test purposes, you might want to just edit some records manually. So I will go ahead and add a record manually. So I'll just steal this GUID and change one of the numbers. And I will put Evan Guthrie, and I'll give him a phone 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, and it commits that record. Now I could either check that here in my WebAPI checker, or I can simply refresh the data and say get data, and we see this thing showing the brand new record.